Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the workshop, Designing Your Marketing Mix, featuring Melissa Connolly, Vice President of University Relations at Hofstra University. This workshop series is sponsored by St. Joseph's College. Today's event should last about 1 hour and includes Q&A, so if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. To tell you a little bit about today's speaker, Melissa Connolly is Vice President for University Relations at Hofstra University and is responsible for Hofstra's communication, marketing, and government and public relations efforts. She was named PR Professional of the Year for an academic institution by PR News. She is an adjunct assistant professor at Hofstra, and under her leadership, Hofstra's communications team has won multiple higher education marketing awards, including a Case Silver Circle of Excellence Award. So now we're going to turn things over to Melissa.
Hi, everyone. Jackie, can you see me okay?
Yes, you're all good and I can hear you well.
Okay, and I'm just gonna now share my screen. And then actually do this as a slideshow from the beginning. Okay, thanks everyone. Is that working okay?
Yes, you're good.
Great. I haven't done a webinar in a while, so just want to make sure it all works. So thanks for joining. I want to thank St. Joseph's College also for sponsoring this webinar series. And I want to thank friends at Hofstra who helped me pull together some quick examples, like Jackie Hulse from our continuing ed division. So I just want to give them a quick shout out. What we're going to do today is we're going to take you through sort of an overall view of the marketing mix, right? What it means, but really what it means to build an audience. And I'm going to have a lot of quick tips, a lot of thoughts about different tools you can use, and at the end, a few resources for you. So first, I just want to talk about messages and how messages gain credibility. And I'm sure that all of you come from very different backgrounds, some big organizations, some small. This is really sort of targeted to what things you can do yourself, and ways you can advance your message yourself. If you have the money to hire agencies and consultants, that's great. This is really focused on things that are doable from your desk, from a person who has a team of 1 or 2 people, or if something is a small enough effort that you can't really afford to engage experts to come in and run a digital campaign for you or something. So first of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how messages gain credibility. And I'm going to say this a couple times, is that people can't have an opinion of you if they don't know who you are or they've never heard of you. So it's building awareness and repetition of the message is probably the first key thing you need to do. To build trust, you have to be known. And to be known, you have to get the word out in a couple of different ways in a couple different times, right? I mean, there have been different, over the years, different statistics about how often a message needs to be seen. I want to say, 20 years ago, I used to hear the magic number 7. Now I tend to hear more like 15 or 16. I don't know. I mean, probably every study would tell you something slightly different. But repetition and awareness building, you have to do first before you gain, get trust or any kind of reputation in the marketplace. So getting your message out and your name out often is part of the key part of building that foundation. At the same time, it's important that people hear about you from different points of view and different angles, right? So if they hear about you 16 times from the same digital campaign, it's less likely to build credibility or awareness than if they hear from you from different angles, which is why an omni-channel approach to you building your marketing mix is so important, right? You want to have some media relations, some digital, some traditional, and some word of mouth building. You're always going to want to look for more than one way to have people aware of you in the marketplace. You also want messages that speak to your customer directly, right? So, and we're going to get into a little bit about knowing who your audience is and how to define them in a little bit, but you want to know who your customer is and speak to them directly. Are they parents? Are they teenagers? Are they older people? You want to use messages and words and channels that are going to be meaningful to them. At the same time, you're going to want to use you're going to want to use images that speak to them, right? So if you're speaking to mothers or fathers, parents, you're going to want to use images that that they can relate to. I mean, and I can give you one out of education. So I was looking at a marketing plan for a part-time online graduate program, and the typical student was a parent. So what they did is the image in that ad was not books or a library. It was a parent with a laptop behind them dealing with a 3-year-old. And so the image spoke to the audience, not necessarily the product. And I think that it's important to think about both when you're crafting messages that people will listen to and see and hear. So credible messages use details, use statistics, if you have them. They show, they don't tell, again, so they use images if possible. And this is a quote from Carla Schuster, who I work with here at Hofstra. Use the superlative fact, not the superlative. What is interesting and what is notable and real about what you're offering to the public, not just that it's interesting or great, right? If you're going to say something is great, why is it great? Can you remove the word great and just use the superlative fact and not the superlative itself? But audience develop is all about earning that audience, right? And so it's about, first and foremost, it's about building relationships with that audience. So, both existing and potential audiences can improve with the help of really quality interactions. So when you build that relationship, you create a direct connection to the customer. So, and they improve, the perception of your business improves, and you also, try to endear yourself a little bit to them. Of course, growing an audience is a necessary component of any company's marketing efforts. And customer acquisition, as we're going to talk about, occurs through several messages, including referrals, ads, targeted advertising, public relations, all sorts of different techniques. But when it comes to existing customers, you need to keep them coming back. And that's another message we're going to hear about throughout this, is the retention of existing customers is much more important and much more cost effective than using advertising to find new ones, right? So finding ways to make people a repeat customer and improving their loyalty to you is much more valuable in the long run and much more cost effective than growing your actual audience base. You have to do both. And I would argue, and we will talk about, building loyal customers creates brand advocates, which actually does help you build your customer base. But you want to use these organic fans to help promote your product to others, right? So audience development really focuses on building relationship, and it really leans into building word of mouth, which I think is one of the most critical parts of your marketing mix. So there are the 4 C's of audience development, right? So before we even get into tactics, I want to talk a little bit about why it's so important to build your audience. So first of all, it's about audience development, about creating and being involved in a community, either by location or by audience. So by getting involved in a local community or a community of, it doesn't have to be like geographically based. It can be, again, in education, sometimes it's based in careers or fields. Being part of a community, you create brand awareness and give the audience a more positive view of you. Also, just create, again, that repetition of your name. Contributing time and resources to a good cause is always a way to build community. And building a community from scratch can be very powerful, but it can also take a lot of time and effort, right? So online forums, Facebook pages, LinkedIn groups, Instagram communities are good examples of places where you can successfully build community. I'm not quite sure they're as powerful, but people do flock to brands online if there's a reason to flock to brands online. It means they have really great content, really great engagement. It's not simply about having a presence in that case, but it's about building that community in some way. And certainly you see that, especially with things like Refinery29 and BuzzFeed. They're successful at building community online. I mean, you might think of groups you yourself belong to. The Dodo has been successful at building community online if you love rescue animals, or hiking groups. I'm a member of a bunch of different hiking groups, and they build great community online. So it's about finding like-minded people. They might not be in a geographic area, but they might be online. That really needs to come from the community. I mean, and I think if brands have a harder time with that, but there may be a way that you can help build a community in a related way. So supporting the community and encouraging it, though, can help an audience feel more in tune with your brand. So when you build relationships, you create connections between you and the audience and between the audience members themselves. And then they become friends, colleagues, family, even on a network. Even the people you meet on an online forum, if you engage in conversation with them, it can become a really powerful thing. And I would go back to my hiking group for that. So you meet your audience on a more granular level. So the next part of the C there is building collaboration. And I think that that's where you can really see your word of mouth and referrals start to grow. Is there a way where when you're building this network, when you're building this family online, that you can create collaborations between audiences, between organizations, or between, in marketing itself, right? So here we talk about when departments work together, sharing data, for example. If I'm, I have an email list over here promoting holiday events, and we think they might like other events we do in another department, can we do some cross collaboration? Again, not to bother people, but to add value to people's lives and maybe point out something they didn't know. Corporate and social outreach partnerships are very powerful and can combine two audiences and expose people to other people that they might not know. So if your audience supports specific organizations, you might want to look into partnering with them. Working with organizations that resonate with your audience increases loyalty and trust and belief in your authenticity. And you may even bring in then customers from other organizations, because again, it's through the power of relationship building that audience. So you think about libraries and schools and how they bring in other organizations, and they are themselves often trusted partners in communities. These are, again, more local, but through social and digital, you can also look at this on a larger scale or a more geographically scattered scale. Featured content, collaborating with your audience themselves. If there's a way for people to show photos, share recipes, Throwback Thursday kinds of things, ways for them to give content to you and collaborate and create discussion. That's another way to collaborate with your audience that can build brand loyalty and interest in your community. But finally, you have to show the audience that you care. And again, all of this is dependent on the fact that you really do care about your audience. I mean, authenticity being the most important of all these values. You want to thank them. You want to talk to them, you want to show appreciation to them. And again, authenticity being the key. Customers are becoming more and more skeptical of companies and advertisement. So 57%, I'm just reading a stat here, 57% of consumers think that most brands create inauthentic content, right? But 86% find authenticity valuable when supporting a brand. So it's a value that people look for. So again, I would say it's really important to find the thing that really works, that seems authentic, natural, and even organic. Don't force something, but find the things that create real value for you and for the audience. And then they will be authentic. So promote real, honest, independent reviews, work with others to show they back your brand. And when you get negative feedback, try to address it right in the day if you can. It's not always possible, I know that, but direct and honest feedback that's non-defensive goes a long way to creating that caring that's going to take is going to help develop your audience even further. So the 3 goals of audience development, And I think actually, when I really think about it, maybe there's just one goal, to develop a greater understanding of your audience. Now, why is that important? Obviously, if you know what makes your audience tick and you understand them, you know where they are, you know what they listen to, you know what values are important to them. You can use that to inform your product development, to be a better provider of services, but also to develop your marketing efforts. You'll appeal to your customers more successfully, and you'll add value that they really appreciate. So if people begin to post about something new that they like, you can learn from that. That can be your own little focus group, right? If they're talking about that they love the material of something, you can expand that. If they're talking that they really like something about a service that you're offering, a program, you can lean into that and do more of that. And even then tell them that their feedback was part of the reason that you did more of it. It's all about creating a conversation, a two-way communication channel that allows you to listen, learn, and then send it back out again. So another piece of data that you can gather from posts is targeting data. So say you find out something about the people who are most likely to submit video to you when you're running a contest, and you find out that they're men in their 20s. Well, then you know something about your customer base and your loyal and engaged customer base that maybe you didn't know before. So putting these things out there allows you to understand a little bit more about who is most likely to engage with you. And those people who are most likely to engage with you are the people who are most likely to talk about you, right? So as you interact with your audience and you encourage community building, you can increase their engagement levels. You're going to find more and more responsive users who comment and respond, and people who promote your content itself. So high engagement levels show that they're interested in what you're saying, and they indicate an emotional reaction, which is the strongest reaction of all, whether it's negative or positive. Reaching your audience through channels becomes easier when you know them and their habits, right? Omni-channel market uses all the channels or means of communication as one unified experience for the consumer. It should be seamless. It's not always, and it's not that easy to make it seamless, but knowing how your audience communicates can help you develop a strategy, where they are, what they respond to, and what they're going to comment about. So you could even, with some of the more scalable social media things that we're going to talk about, even use that kind of data or those kind of tools to target people at very specific times during their customer journey. So you can also then learn how to do these messages in a way that they'll appreciate and that offer them a service. They're not annoying marketing messages, but they're reminders that are helpful or useful at the time, at the time in their journey. And at the end of the day, I think really the goal here is you're building brand ambassadors, which is the most credible and the most authentic of all your marketing efforts. If you build people who promote your brand for you and believe in your brand, I mean, in colleges see this with alumni. When alumni are loyal, then they become the best source of referrals to colleges, of inquiries to colleges. I mean, that's probably a really obvious example, but brand ambassadors, they build your word of mouth, they build referrals, and they create trust, because people trust other people way more than they trust advertising messages. So that's just a little bit on audience development. So defining that audience, and we talked a little bit about ways to do that. Do you know who they are, where they are demographically? I mean, you could have a national audience, you could have a local audience, you could have a regional, they could be urban, they could be students in schools. There are hundreds of ways to reach out to people in their audience once you have a good definition of that audience, right? What are their media habits? This is an example. One of my favorite examples is of people's media habits are, you get people all the time who say, I need to be on Facebook, or I need to be on Twitter. And one of the first things I say to them is, well, what are you going to say on Facebook and Twitter? And is that where your audience is? Like, I don't recommend that people necessarily start a Facebook profile for 15-year-olds now. But are you on TikTok? Are you in other places digitally that they're going to find you? what do they read and watch? And then how do they make decisions? Do they make decisions because they consult with influencers? Do they make decisions? Are they buying something on the spur of the moment? So you need a great online store. Is it a long-term service or a donation they're making to your organization? What spurs them to make a decision? And have you tested different kinds of creative? I think if you're thinking about advocacy, right? If you're dealing with rescue animals, what's a more effective message? Is it showing an animal before they've been rescued or after they've been rescued, right? Those are things that you can test when you're trying to build donations or volunteer base. Where do they spend their time, and then who influences them? Again, when you want to know who the influencers are, so you know how to build that word of mouth. So finding your people is probably the most important thing, and finding your people really can define the marketing mix itself, right? The media mix. We had this local pizzeria that always was taking ads out in the community newspaper, which is the community newspaper is a very important tool, but it was expensive. And really, by hanging out at the various PTAs, donating pizzas and having good signs there with coupons, they probably built a loyal fan base much more by spending their time and effort on that than they did on the ads. Another pizzeria I know has a great online presence, and people do the ordering online. So that's how they built their audience. But another one whose online thing is clunky never gets it that way. So you want to look and see how your audience is reacting to you, and what ways do you build trust. If you have limited sponsorship dollars, it may be that your sponsorship dollars are better served by, if you're local, sponsoring little league teams, and then doing things with them and posting that and creating some viral buzz on that rather than advertising. It may be that advertising sales is your most important thing. So what builds authenticity? It's really word of mouth. McKinsey suggests that word of mouth generates more than twice the sales of paid advertising in categories, very diverse categories. So there's just, why would you want to build word of mouth? As we talked about, trust and also better targeting. If you build word of mouth, you know who your audience is better, and then you know how to target them better in other ways other than word of mouth. There's also reasons why not to spend time on word of mouth, because it can take really long. So if you're promoting a sale or you're promoting a new product launch and you need to get it in the marketplace quick, word of mouth might not be your most effective way. And if you're doing a straight up ad campaign or doing paid media, you have more message control that way. So again, locally, sponsorships and events, they're very important. Relationships help build that loyalty. Things like signage, you can't really underestimate how that kind of visibility helps build that awareness. Again, consumers can't have an opinion about you if they don't know who you are. So I want to just talk a little bit about the message, and when we talk about earned, owned, and paid, and you might have heard these terms before, the three different kinds of media that we have control over, or that there are messaging, right? So the most common example of owned media is your website. Although blog sites and social media channels can be examples of owned media properties too. So things that you have complete control over are owned. The more owned media you have, the more chances you have to extend your digital presence and your owned presence in the digital sphere, right? So if you have a YouTube channel and you own all the content on it, that's going to give you more of a chance to be seen in digital spaces and things like that. If owned media sites are the destination, then earned media is the vehicle that helps people get there, right? So earned media is a way to essentially word of mouth, but it can also be seen virally. It's also other people's websites. It's where your referrals might come from. One of the most effective driving forces of earned media is usually a combination of strong organic on owned media, meaning that you optimize your own website, and content distributed by the brand. So first page rankings and good content are usually the biggest drivers that get people to your owned media, and it's because earned media helps it be findable. And then rankings on the first page of your search engines place your owned media sites and content links in a position to receive higher engagement and shares. which is why a good SEO strategy is crucial. We'll talk a little bit about that. And these can be, the earned media can be other people's blogs, infographics, videos, press releases, webinar, or ebook. The content has to be worthwhile, though, for people to actually pay attention to it. So you need a really good content strategy. But paid media is a way to get the ball rolling and create exposure, right? So while paid media is probably the least trusted, it is a way to get people to maybe make that first click or think about your product or service or organization. So, and social media sites now obviously offer paid opportunities. So you can use digital paid, you can use traditional paid, you can even pay influencers to rep your content or services, I think, as long as they're doing it in an authentic and transparent way. Pay-per-click ads and display ads are other forms of paid media. So here we just talk a little bit about other tactics that assist with audience development. And these are all things that, when we talk about the different kinds of the media mix. Email campaigns. Email to this day remains the most cost-effective way to reach customers, especially customers who know you. People always think, oh, email's dead. I mean, most people check their email more than 10 times a day. That's why you tend to get, a message a day from brands that you've interacted with, because you just delete the ones that you don't want to look at. But if you click on 1 or 2 a year, the brand makes money on that, right? So social media outreach and soliciting user-generated content, again, those are ways that help develop your audience, targeted advertising, loyalty programs, and referral programs. I would say events are actually one of the most powerful ways to build brand advocates and audience, but they're very, very labor intensive. But when they work well, they're probably the single best way. Wait, did I skip to the end? That's supposed to be at the end. Okay. So helping new customers find you. Again, digital sponsorship, media relations, and traditional media advertising are the 4 sort of buckets that we look at. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these things that are scalable, meaning you might be able to afford them on a small budget. You can do them yourself, and you can and do some pretty sophisticated things. Sponsorships, again, I think building that relationship is key. Media relations also is usually still highly trusted. As much as people talk about fake media, media relations are a highly effective way of, if a well-placed story in a respected media outlet still builds more authenticity than almost any other message. And traditional media can be expensive. Is there any one place that people will see you? That's part of the reason why the mix has become important. Now we all use different media tools to get the information we need, which is why we all talk about kind of creating a mix for ourselves. So just to give you a couple of digital solutions that are all doable yourself. The least you should do is optimize your website. There are a couple of tools for that. They start out as free. They're called Moz, and 2 of them are Moz and SEMrush. They're just ways to see how your web, to give yourself a couple of ways to look at your website and look at if the copy on your website is matching the terms that you need that people might find you through, right? If you are, again, a pizza place and you're trying to optimize your website, if you spend the first 2 paragraphs of your website talking about your family history and you never use the word pizza, you're likely not going to be optimized for pizza in Lynbrook, if that's what you're trying to do, right? So these tools help you sort of figure out how to be optimized in the place and in the words that you want to be optimized by. Can people find you on Google? I mean, everybody's seen that, right? Where most businesses now, if I look up a business on Google, I can find their hours, their phone number, and their website. If you can't, you can just go to Google My Business. I even did it for here once because Hofstra wasn't showing up on a particular map. Now or maybe a part of Hofstra wasn't, and I was like, why isn't this showing up on the map? So we went to Google My Business and fixed it. Have you considered paid SEO, search engine optimization, so that you show up at the top or near the top of a page if you're not? And sometimes, algorithms change. The way that people find you can change. You can certainly do Google AdWords yourself. By going to Google AdWords, there's a tutorial and you can go through the process. I find it helpful. Even though I use an agency at this point for most of the things we do for Hofstra, I like to know how it's constructed. It helps me be able to articulate what I think the keywords should be. You can also find tools that will, especially in Moz and SEMrush, that tell you what words are being searched. We made the mistake once of creating something with a completely new term because we thought, oh, we don't want to be the same old as everybody else. We want this new term, this new title. The problem was, no, it was so new, nobody knew to search for it. So its search volume was next to nothing. So that's the argument between, I'm sorry, I forgot to turn off my regular phone. That's one of the things that you battle online is, what are people searching for? And are you going to be able to be found by how people are searching? In colleges, we have this argument all the time. Most people, when they want to look up student residence halls, especially people my age, still look for the word dorm. Colleges like to use the word residence hall. They think it is more modern and more inclusive, but people don't look for residence halls, they look for dorms. So that's one of the battles that we deal with here all the time, is we try to create terms to kind of change the perception of something, but if that's not what people are searching for, they're not finding it. And do you have two-way communication? Do you have an online store or call to action? These are also much easier than they used to be. You no longer need, obviously, a coder to set these up for you. There are loads of examples in Squarespace and in other tools that almost anybody can set up an online store and do commerce online if that's what you're looking for. I just like to make sure people are aware of this and how not easy they are, but that they're very doable on a small scale. So Jackie Hall sent me these examples, custom audience and lookalike audiences. So custom audiences, you can take your own, like an email list of your own customers and serve them ads through Facebook, right? And this can be useful because if you have a list of customers already, you can, or you have a list of people who maybe have started an application but not finished it. You can customize the messages that you send to them for relatively small amounts of money. It's labor intensive, but they're small amounts of money. So custom audience is a way to speak to people that you already know. Lookalike audience is a way to find people who are like your audience. You're never going to know who they are. Facebook's not going to do that. That would obviously be a little troubling for privacy rules, but a lookalike audience takes an email list you already have, looks at it, and says, look, I'm going to serve this ad to people like that. So we've used it for some of our CE programs to just expand our audience. So we're finding, for example, parents, or finding the type of people who might be interested in real estate programs. I think you need 1,000 records at least for that to be worthwhile. But if you look at Facebook lookalike audiences, the tutorials are really easy to follow. Facebook Pixel is a way to see who it's a kind of retargeting in that you put that Facebook Pixel on your website, and then Facebook will retarget them with ads if they visited your website. So everybody, I'm sure by now people know what retargeting is. I know like 10 years ago when it was a big thing, if you visited the Zappos shoe site, you were getting retargeted all the time by Zappos with shoes that you might like. It still exists today. It's not as powerful as it was 10 years ago, but the Facebook Pixel is kind of like that. LinkedIn also has a matched customer audience. LinkedIn is now much more efficient. If those of you who were early adopters with LinkedIn like 10 years ago, it was expensive and it didn't work particularly well. Now, again, you can use it for smaller audiences, and it can target both advertising on the LinkedIn feed as well as using messaging. And Spotify is now, this year, has become available for smaller ad budgets. I think it's worth looking at this because it's highly customizable. I mean, you can look at it by type of music, by zip code. You can spend as little as, I think it's a couple $100s now on Spotify. And, if you have a music lover or a person who likes a certain kind of lifestyle, their ad studio can really help you hone in on a type of person. So if you know your business is all people who love Beatles music or oldies or emo or whatever, that Spotify can help you find people in that lifestyle and do it very affordably. Where I want to say again, 5 or 6 years ago, you needed several $1,000s to have a Spotify campaign. You don't anymore. So again, that could be a way if you have a local or regional business that you can target very easily. So just some, okay, 1036, that's good. Just to remember that people can't like you if they don't know you. So building awareness is the first key to building relationships. But then you have to find ways to create relationships, not rely only on mass media tools to go to market. Email is still the most effective and cost-effective way to get your message out. You want to use tools though that help you do it. I mean, one of the reasons I had the constant contact link up is you really want to use an email system that protects you from the spam laws and creates a system that forces you to follow them and gets that off of your Optimum or your Yahoo or your Gmail account. You really want to invest a little bit of money in an email system if you haven't already. Most of us have at this point, but if you're starting something new, I mean, I did a PTA newsletter. I bought a small constant contact account because I didn't want someone to tag me personally as spam if they were annoyed by a message in the PTA. Because if that happens a couple times, you can lose your right to be on a certain kind of email server, as you all know. So that's why it's worth it to use the constant contact or one of the email services, one of the cheaper ones. Scalable social media tools in Google are cost-effective ways to use technology, and you can personalize them on a small scale. What was that Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn movie about when they interned at Google? And that was it was kind of a sales pitch for Google, but that was one of the things they talked about, is that these digital tools are so scalable now that you can use them locally and use them pretty effective locally and really make yourself look professionalized and personalized. But what will you use, right? And what can you afford? What are you good at? Again, don't create a TikTok page if you don't understand TikTok, and don't think you're going to have a Newsday campaign if you don't have the budget for it or the ability to design advertising. Do the things that you're best at, and then they'll be authentic, and they'll be tools that you go back to time and time again. Again, don't chase the shiny new thing unless your audience does. So unless you're talking to Gen Z and teenagers, don't chase that shiny new thing. And one thing I didn't really talk about too much in here is measure what you can. If it's web traffic, if it's inquiries, if it's engagement on social media, keep a couple of benchmarks. There'll be places that you can go back to and look at how you've done on social media with engagements, or look at what your web traffic has been like, or how many inquiries you've been, or how big your email list has grown. Just a couple of them, so you kind of have a track on what's working and what's not. And at the end of the day, your current customers and even your employees are your single most important brand ambassadors. Referrals and word of mouth are key to building that audience and that marketing mix. If you have to make a resource choice, if you find yourself in that position, you really want to choose your already known customers and friends. It might be worth it to spend some money on retargeting or email versus a new ad to bring in new customers in a new way. It is always harder to create a new audience than it is to build off your old audience and have your old audience or your audience help you find new people. I'm just going to go back to, where'd it go? When I was doing this with the notes, I think I was sliding things around. Couple of fun resources here. I love the resource StuKent, but apparently I don't think you can use it individually. StuKent sells to higher ed simulations that you can play with to try to build better social media campaigns, and they give you results. You can do Google ads to see if you're effective. They don't sell it, I don't think, for individuals. I haven't found that, but they do have some great videos on things like Instagram and building stuff. Measuring KPIs. Zoom Info is an inexpensive but great business to business email service that gives you, that you can look up data on people by companies, by trade, by interest level, by but it is a B2B and it is expensive. But this measuring KPIs gives you like hundreds of KPIs that you can choose from if you want to look at, well, what do I want to measure? I'm not even sure. And the Marketo-Marcom prediction, that's just a fun sort of future facing, what's new in marketing, what's coming up in the next year. So that's it from me. I feel like I've talked long enough. I'm just staring at myself in my screen, so it feels very strange. Anyway, so it's 10:40. I'm happy to take any questions or criticisms, complaints, comments.
Thanks, Melissa. I actually have a couple questions.
I'm going to stop screen sharing. Is that all right? Okay.
Oh, fine. But I do want to remind people, if you have a question, please use the Q&A box. But while you were talking, one of the questions that came to my mind is, when do you decide a campaign isn't working? What's your process for that?
It's engagement, I think, because we very rarely do a campaign anymore that doesn't have the opportunity for engagement. You know, I mean, 20 years ago, you kind of put this stuff out in the world and hope the phone rang. And now there's a lot of opportunities to build elements of a campaign in ways that that people, and I guess that's where you really want to build some KPIs, right? Are people clicking on it? Are they talking about it? Do you have an element of it on Facebook or Twitter? Do you have a YouTube channel? Are people visiting it and playing the video? Or people filling out an inquiry form? Or people retweeting it or sharing it? So if the campaign's not raising anything, we always look for, even if we have a message that's on the radio and in an ad, we look at ways to use it in our two-way communication things too. So so I think it's when when the engagement doesn't rise at all, you let it go.
Okay. Next question from me. You talked a little bit about if you're a pizzeria, and that's a great example, because if I own a pizzeria and my delivery zone is 7 miles from the store, then I know how to find people who may be in my audience. But what if I don't have a geographical type of boundary like that? How do you start to define an audience?
We could do it by interest, or you could do it, and you can do it by career. Those get a little bit more expensive. You can also start with a geographical area, right? So, one of the great myths that happened in higher ed like 10 years ago is when people started doing online programs, that, well, now I can enroll people all over the world. But what ended up happening in study after study was that people still went to online programs where they had some physical familiarity, right? So it only expanded your radius by 10 or 15 miles, actually, right? So still, for Hofstra and for most institutions of higher ed, if you're not Harvard or a really well internationally known institution, it's still geographic location that drives a lot of people's awareness, right? Driving by the place, seeing it in signage, seeing it in your local media. So even if you're not trying to build a customer base by geographic awareness, some of it gets driven by geographic awareness. I mean, I'd even say the Fair Media Council has a national agenda, but it's known locally, right? So you start there anyway. But then you can also, a couple things is a lot of the tools you can do by career, by discipline, by interest, by other kinds of demographics like age. One of the things I like to do is look and see if there are trade groups that share an interest, right? So especially, again, this works really well for higher ed in that, I look to see if there's an association that has a conference in a field, and if that's something that's going to be, if I'm doing graduate programs or skill-based programs that I think are going to be interesting to journalists, I go to the I always say AEJMC, and see if they'll rent me their list or if they'll let me advertise on their website. And usually those trade show ones are actually pretty cost effective too, because they're not the same as advertising in the New York Times and Newsday. They get to the 2,500 people you really want to get to. I don't know if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yes, and we do have a question here. What is your recommended split for digital versus traditional media? Should you focus more heavily on one aspect?
I was just having this conversation with somebody last week, and so I think it depends on your goal. But we were talking about it in the context of promoting online graduate programs. And the split that we said, and it's not scientific, but we said 70% digital, 30% traditional. I'm not certain I believe it, but I mean, it certainly has changed. It's flipped, right? The powerful thing about digital, and the thing why I think it's really so important to consider the mix, is someone put it this way to me once: you have to both pitch and catch. If you're only catching, which is what I say a digital can be, right? Because you're encouraging that call to action, you're encouraging that lead gen. If you're only catching and no one's pitching, then no one's building that awareness. But what's so powerful about digital now is everybody can see how many hits did I get, how many inquiries did I get. So everybody defaults to that because it feels like I'm doing something and I know what I'm doing. The traditional awareness building is riskier. It goes back to that old David Ogilvy maxim. I know that part of my ad dollars are wasted, but I don't know which part. But without awareness building, your catching is not going to be nearly as effective, right? You haven't built up that awareness, but it's incredibly powerful in terms of targeting. So I still think you want to have the discipline to have a split, but I've heard as high as 70-30 if lead gen is important to you. And most businesses have now figured out a way to either do lead gen or to sell online or something like that where you can measure it. But don't ever let go of that 30% to 40% awareness raising, whether that's money or time, so.
Okay. Here's another question for you. Do you have any examples of campaigns that you think were really well done, whether they were by you or a brand people would know of, or even someone local?
I have, you don't see as many full campaigns anymore. I've spent the last couple of months looking at brand activation campaigns, which are more event-based marketing, because that's what I'm teaching right now. There's some really great activation campaigns. The nice thing about brand activation, which is really where you're trying to encourage people to interact with you in a way, and you're creating brand ambassadors, is that you really do create very loyal customers once they interact with you through an event, and that they're sharing that content. So Refinery 29 brand activation campaign I really liked. BuzzFeed had a couple of them. Books and movies do this particularly well. But mostly because I like how their capability of making something viral. And I've spent a lot of time in the college space. The problem with the college space is you don't see every element of a campaign unless you're the target audience. So it's harder and harder to see the full brand campaign from start to finish now with all the targeting. So I'd say, if you look up, if you Google brand activation, you'll find some fun stuff. And I wasn't ready for that question itself. So like I said, I'm teaching an event marketing class right now. So that's where my head is in brand activation. There's a really fun one that I think, and no one probably could, if you look up 007 and Coca-Cola and Waterloo Station, you get a YouTube video of a really fun brand activation event from like 5 or 6 years ago. They again used that collaboration, that idea of collaboration between brands sometimes being more powerful than one brand doing something by itself. I'm not sure it's repeatable, but it's just a fun YouTube video.
Okay. If anyone else has any other questions? Or Melissa, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, that was way too much for me anyway.
No, this has been great. I keep getting questions from people saying, can they review this? And yes, you can find the recording on our YouTube channel. So yes, you will be able to replay this over and over again for your amusement as well as education.
It could be background during the holidays.
There you go. So I want to thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions at all, you can feel free to email me. It's Jackie, Jaci, at fairmediacouncil.org.